Thank you for Caleb for having me here in Lifetree. Thanks for not slamming your laptop down the minute you heard me introduced, or turning off your phone or swiping wherever. We're going to be here for a super long time because I have all these pages here, but these three are blank. And this one has like 100 words on it. And I have 8 minutes, so that's where we're headed. I've been really kind of camping out on this for even before Caleb asked me, and maybe that's why he asked me. But 2 Corinthians says, whoever sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, but whoever sows generously will reap generously. And, and I was thinking about generosity, like Drew mentioned, man, Rolf, if you're watching, that was on point. It's so true the way that you choose to speak into people's lives. And generosity is really a willingness. For me, it's a willingness, whenever I've received it or I've seen it, is to do more than expected, to do more than the usual. And, that's, I'm 40, I'm 1 year younger than Sonia. Just throwing at Sonia if you're watching. I'm 43, and I'm getting to the place where, it's starting to resonate that I actually have everything my heart desires. And if you know me, you probably wouldn't say that guy is super generous with his time. And I'm going to try not to cry, because I'm going to talk about my kids. I'm going to try not to cough, because that would be terrible, given the context here. But really, generosity is love in action, and I believe you can give without loving, but I don't think you can love without giving. And, somebody who really exemplified, maybe you know him, this to me was Tom Oshiro. He was a hero of the faith for me. He invested in people so well. Like he was a good friend, but he just loved really well. And I remember he quit smoking years ago. Like, I think it was okay to smoke at a certain point in history, whereas, smoking's great, it'll, cure things or something, I'm not too sure, but he was of that mindset when he was younger. He's Japanese, if you don't know him, Japanese-Canadian, and he was a football player, and his fingers all, gnarled up because of football. But he would smoke like crazy, and then he gave it up, and I remember he always had cigarettes on him, all the time. I'm like, he doesn't even smoke. He'd have cigarettes, and he would have a pocket full of toonies, just like you could see it. And sometimes he'd have the cigarette in the sleeve, like old school. And when we were at the Mustard Seed, and he was the pastor there, he would just constantly give out these cigarettes to people who just needed a break. And he would give out toonies all the time, like crazy. And if you were at his funeral, it was probably one of the most pivotal moments of my life, because there were hundreds of people at Glad Tidings, and a lot of them came from a pretty rough situation, but they were there because he was so generous with his time, and really he showed an interest in who they were, and he took the time to be with them. And I always remember, it seemed like every Sunday with Miriam and myself and Sonia, and we'd go to, he loved Swiss Chalet for some strange reason, and we would go there. And have you been to Swiss Chalet with Tom Show? And it's this weird thing where it's like, we're going to Swiss Chalet? I'm like, okay. And we'd sit there, and he'd always get the quarter chicken and gravy and the Swiss Chalet meal. And he would always pay for it. And we'd just sit there and we'd just listen to him just talk about people in this investment. It's all he did, was he just loved on people. And to me, watching him in, being at his funeral and seeing those people come back, and just, we're so thankful to meet Jesus through him, was just absolutely one of the pinnacles of my life. And so he really exemplified that, because for Tom, time was an investment in people, and people received that as an interest in them. I was listening to this podcast the other day, and these two guys were talking, and I think for me, I'm so task-oriented. I don't know if you resonate with that, but habitually I do things so often that I don't sometimes step out of those tasks that need to be accomplished to make time for people. And so these two gentlemen were talking, and he said, well, do you love your mom? Oh, yeah, I love my mom. Okay. How old's your mom? Well, my mom is 77 years old. And the fellow goes, well, how often do you see your mom? He's like, well, if I'm lucky on a good year, I'll be able to see her twice in a year. And he said, well, if your mom's 77 and the average life expectancy in Canada anyways is 82 years old, so you have 5 years left, just statistically speaking. And he's like, okay, that's cool. That's okay. If you're lucky, you got 5 years left with your mom. Then what he did was he flipped the continuum of time. Because I think if we're looking at time in the construct of 5 years seems like a lot, or maybe it seems like a little, I don't know. But it seems like you still have some, and you can use it wisely. But then he said something that really hit me. He said, if your mom has 5 years left and you see her twice a year, if you're lucky, then you're lucky, instead of having 5 years left, you're lucky if you have 10 more visits with her for the rest of her life. And it just was like, ugh. And when he flipped that switch from time as a continuum to time as experiences with people, he said, how does that feel? He's like, it feels like I need to go call my mom. And he got up and left the set to go call his mom. I was like, okay. And the guy's like, all right, well, I guess that's it for the podcast. And Sam, my son, he's got this routine going on right now, and it's rather impressive for me. But he gets up at 6, then he gets on the elliptical, like school days. He gets up at 6, jumps on the elliptical for 20 minutes, then does a 3.5 kilometer run around the neighborhood, and then he comes back, he does an ab workout, and then he jumps into an ice-cold shower, And so I was sitting there having, he'd been at Life already for about an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm like, hey, Sam. I come downstairs, and I'm sitting there, and I have a coffee, and he just looks at me. And he's all disheveled and sweaty. It's like, take your, go have that shower already, he's sweating. But it's like, it just hit me, okay. He's in grade 10, going into grade 11, and, we got 2 years left with him. Hopefully more. In the home. If he decides he wants to go to Stanford, I hope he doesn't, because it's very expensive. But if he does go to university off the island, then ultimately, we got a year and a half left, 2 years, right? And then it hit me just instead of looking at it, I got this time, how many more encounters do I have? And I looked at him, and he's like, what? You're a weirdo. I'm like, yeah. I'm just looking at him. And he kept looking over at me, and I'm like, hey, let's go for tacos tonight. And he's like, okay. And I realized, if I'm lucky, I get, we go out for dinner probably more than we should, but we go out for dinner regularly. And ultimately, the one-on-one, usually my relationships are structured. So we're doing something task-oriented, and then, let's go for a coffee as well. Or let's go out for dinner as well. But I was looking at my son, and I'm like, no, it's not about that. I'm interested in you. I'm going to invest in you. Because the reality is, if everything stays the same, we might have 6 more dinners together, just one-on-one. And that was hard to stomach. So we went out for tacos, which was great. And it was awesome. And I loved on him. And, and so for me, and this is my encouragement when it comes to generosity today, is if instead of viewing time as a continuum, what if we actually started to flipped that and viewed time as rich experiences with people. And, Tom did that. And I was playing tennis with Adam Henkel, and I said, you know what, dude? Like, if I actually started to live like that, I said, I'd be as popular as Drew Mackey. I'd have so many friends, I wouldn't have to hang out with you anymore, man. And he was like, that's freaking awesome. And, and that's just the encouragement I have for you is, instead of saying we have the rest of our lives, like if you actually pare it down to these encounters with people that Rolf does so well, that Tom Oshiro did so well, I would encourage you to, instead of saying you got 5 years left, you got 10 visits. So what does that look like? And I would just encourage you to sow generously into those experiences, because you will reap generously as well.